everyone, and welcome right back to part 4 of our Go scheduler explainer. Over the previous parts, we've built a really solid foundation of Go's GMP architecture, the Go routines, the machines or OS threads, and the processors. But today we're tackling a massive real-world problem. We're going to unpack exactly how Go handles seemingly blocking operations, things like waiting for a network packet or reading a massive file, without completely destroying the incredible concurrency that Go is so famous for.
So this brings us to a really fundamental question. If kernel threads are inherently heavy, and we already know from our sources that context switching between them takes significant overhead because you have to save and restore dozens of registers, and if blocking operations literally freeze these threads, how on earth does Go multiplex millions of Go routines so seamlessly? Think about traditional models for a second. They map one user thread to one OS thread. That means if you have 10,000 active network connections, you need 10,000 OS threads. That exhausts your memory incredibly fast. Go, however, uses an M-to-N model, mapping many Go routines to fewer OS threads. So when one of those Go routines inevitably needs to wait for data, how do we prevent the underlying OS thread from freezing and halting all the other Go routines waiting in line behind it?
Section 1. The illusion of blocking inside the network polar. Picture this. Imagine a single Go routine currently running on your processor. It's happily executing user code, and suddenly it hits a standard con.read function. It needs to read data from a network connection. Now, in a traditional system, this triggers a blocking system call. The thread reaches out to the network card and just waits. It completely stalls until the data arrives. But in Go, that entire stalling process is completely bypassed. Instead of blocking the underlying OS thread, the Go runtime actually steps in and intercepts this network call. It uses non-blocking file descriptors behind the scenes. The runtime immediately pauses the Go routine, saves its state, and shifts it from a running state into a waiting state. And the absolutely crucial point to take away here, the OS thread, the M, is instantly freed up. It doesn't sit around waiting. It immediately looks for the next runnable Go routine in the queue and just keeps executing. So where exactly does our waiting Go routine go? Well, let's add a brand new standalone component to our architecture diagram, the network polar, or netpoll. This is a dedicated component built right into the Go runtime, and its entire job is to manage these non-blocking I/O operations. It takes our waiting Go routine and associates it directly with the specific file descriptor we're trying to read from, holding on to it entirely outside of the standard processor run queues. What's absolutely fascinating here is the underlying efficiency. The network polar doesn't just rapidly poll the network over and over again, wasting precious CPU cycles. No way. Instead, it hooks directly into highly optimized OS-specific APIs. On Linux, it leverages epoll. On macOS, it uses QQ. On Windows, it's IOCP. Go cleverly uses just a single epoll instance for the entire process. This allows the operating system to asynchronously watch thousands or literally millions of network connections simultaneously, all without dedicating a single blocking thread to each one. And the payoff for all this is brilliant. The exact moment the data packet finally arrives, the OS notifies the network polar. The network polar quickly identifies which file descriptor received the data, locates the waiting Go routine attached to it, and instantly injects that Go routine right back into a run queue. The Go routine state shifts from waiting back to runnable. To the developer writing the Go code, the con.read function just seamlessly finishes, and the code continues. It looks like it blocked, but underneath, we didn't waste a single OS thread. Section 2. System calls. Handling the unavoidable block. Okay, so network I/O is solved beautifully. But what if a Go routine makes a heavy file system call that absolutely must block? Say you're reading a massive file from a slow disk. You can't always use the network polar for everything. As the Go routine executes this heavy syscall, it unfortunately traps both itself, the G, and the machine, the M, inside the operating system kernel. Execution on that specific thread is completely halted. Now, keeping our GMP model in mind, that OS thread is currently bound to a processor, a P, which holds a local queue of other Go routines just waiting for their turn. If the thread is stuck, that entire queue is totally stalled. To prevent stalling that entire queue, the runtime performs this highly coordinated handoff. Before the system call fully takes over, the runtime records that the Go routine is stepping away. Then, if the thread remains blocked in the syscall for too long, specifically more than 10 milliseconds, which is often detected by a background thread called sysmon, the runtime forcefully detaches the processor baton, the P, from the stuck thread, the M. It takes that processor along with its entire queue of waiting Go routines and attaches it to a new available thread. This is a total lifesaver.
The blocked thread stays blocked in the kernel doing its heavy lifting, but the rest of your application seamlessly continues processing other goroutines on the new thread. Eventually, that block clears, and the recovery phase begins. Once the heavy file read finishes, that original thread wakes up from the kernel. It's holding a goroutine that's totally ready to run, but remember, it no longer has a processor. So it attempts a fast path. It frantically tries to grab any available idle processor it can find. If it grabs one, the goroutine continues executing immediately. But if all processors are currently busy, it takes the slow path. The thread drops the goroutine into the global run queue, so another processor will eventually pick it up, and the thread actually parks itself, putting itself to sleep to save system resources until it's needed again.
Section 3. Waking up. Timers explained. All right, we've conquered network I/O and heavy syscalls, but what about time? Let's trace what happens when our goroutine hits a standard time.Sleep command. If the OS thread simply paused and waited for the clock to run out, we'd waste massive amounts of resources. So instead, a function called gopark is invoked. The scheduler moves the goroutine entirely off the active processor, setting its state to waiting. It then places the timer associated with this sleep into a specialized timer queue. Now look closely at how this is structured. It's not one giant global list. It is a per-processor min-heap data structure. By keeping it per processor, Go avoids expensive global locks. And by using a min-heap, the timer with the absolute nearest deadline is always kept right at the very top, making it incredibly fast for the system to check.
Because it's so efficient, the thread just goes on to execute other work. During its normal scheduling loop, the processor naturally checks the top of its min-heap. When that timer at the top finally expires, the scheduler, or our trusty background sysmon thread if the system is really busy, spots the deadline. It pulls the timer, finds the sleeping goroutine, and effortlessly slides the goroutine right back into the runnable queue. The goroutine wakes up seamlessly, right on time, without ever having blocked a single hardware thread.
Section 4. The preemption question. The final vulnerability. We've seen today how the Go runtime elegantly routes around blocks using cooperative scheduling, where goroutines voluntarily yield to keep the system flowing. But honestly, there's one final vulnerability here. What if a goroutine gets stuck in a tight, CPU-bound mathematical loop? Imagine a piece of code performing heavy cryptography, or just a really massive for loop without any system calls, network reads, or timers to pause it. Under a purely cooperative model, this goroutine would literally never yield. It would monopolize its OS thread and its processor forever, completely starving all other goroutines waiting in the local queue. So here's the question you should absolutely take away from this explainer today. If the Go scheduler relies heavily on goroutines voluntarily pausing, what prevents one rogue CPU-bound goroutine from running forever and bringing your entire application to a grinding halt? Think back to that background thread we briefly mentioned today, the sysmon thread and its 10-millisecond watchdog timer. How exactly does it force a running thread to stop? That is exactly the fascinating preemption mechanic we'll have to explore next time. Keep exploring the sources, and thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.